If HMS Gallant fires a 61-knot torpedo at Yamato 4 kilometers away, will the captain of the Gallant have time to finish his coffee before the torpedo hits its mark?
All on the bowling, Kitty is my darling. All on the bowling, bowling hall.
The answer is, of course, no, because he's a British captain and therefore is drinking tea, not coffee, preferably with a nice little slice of fruitcake. I was inspired to make this video watching Flambas on Twitch, and he was playing a destroyer, I think it was a Benson, and a Grosser Kurfürst pushed into the cap that he was in, and he fired some torpedoes, and the distance between them was only 4 kilometers. But the torpedoes got there in a few seconds, and I remember thinking, well, these torpedoes are travelling, I don't know, 50, 60 knots. It would take them a lot longer than that to travel 4 kilometres. There must be some kind of exaggeration factor involved. So I plan to go through and calculate what the actual exaggeration factor is, and this is what we're going to go through in the rest of this video. Here we have the mighty, mighty Japanese battleship Yamato. Uchusenkan, yeah, that one. And it's her that we're going to use as a yardstick because she has a length that's known in the real world of 265 meters, and also she's one of the largest ships in the game, so any measurements that we make using her speed are going to be more accurate than a smaller ship. And also, it turns out it's very difficult to measure something inside a computer with a ruler, so we have to rely on something anchored in the real world, so we're going to use the length of the ship. Let's take a look at her vital statistics. At the waterline, Yamato is 265 meters long from bow to stern. Her published in-game speed with a speed signal is 28.4 knots, which is 28.4 nautical miles per hour. Just so that we're using the same units here, we'll convert that into meters per second. And we can see that she travels just under 15 meters per second. Now that we have her length and her speed in the same units, we can work out how long it would take Yamato to travel through her length at her published maximum speed. So if we take the distance and we divide it by the velocity, that should give us the travel time. And if we do that calculation, we see that Yamato should travel through her length at her maximum published speed in 18.14 seconds. So let's check that and see how long it takes at maximum speed. When the bow reaches the buoy, I'll start a timer, which is going to count the number of seconds. There we go, timer is running, and then I'll stop the timer when it reaches the stern of the ship. And we should see that it's 80. Oh, hang on a minute, it's not. It actually seems to have taken 6 and a bit seconds. So why don't we do that again just to check there wasn't a tailwind or something. Okay, here we go, starting the timer as we get to the bow. And 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, 5, 1,000, 6, 1,000. Yeah, that's not 18 seconds. It looks like the published speed of 28.4 knots, 14.61 meters per second, is not accurate. Let's do a little bit of basic maths. So it should take 18.14 seconds for Yamato to travel through her length. Let's divide that by the time that it actually took, which was 6.27 seconds. And what we find is that Yamato seems to be traveling 2.89 times faster than she says she is. So if she's traveling 2.89 times faster than she actually says she is, what speed is her model actually going relative to her length? Well, if we take that 2.89 and we multiply it by the published speed of 14.61 meters per second, we find that Yamato's model in the game is travelling at 42.27 meters per second. And if we convert that into the more familiar knots, we get a figure of 82.16 knots. So Yamato is not travelling at 28.4 knots. She's actually travelling at 82.16 knots, which are the same as 94.58 miles per hour, or 152.16 kilometers per hour. Now I've checked this 2.89 times factor against some other ships, and it turns out that every single ship in the game is travelling 2.89 times faster than its published speed. So there's basically a multiplication factor for all ship velocities of 2.89 times. I'm about to show you real-time game footage of Yamato travelling at full speed, which is the same thing as her travelling at 82.16 knots in the real world. In order to show you what she would look like in the real world travelling at her published speed of 28.4 knots, I have to slow the footage down 2.89 times. So this is what she would look like in real life travelling at maximum speed. If you want to experience this yourself in the game, just set the Yamato's speed to about 10 knots, and you'll experience what it was like to be travelling in the real Yamato going full speed. So ships in the game seem to travel at about 2.89 times the speed they would do in the real world if they were travelling at the speeds published in the game. And don't forget, this is by design. It's designed to make the game more exciting, it's designed to make things happen more quickly, and it's designed to make matches last a reasonable amount of time. This makes me wonder, if ship velocities are exaggerated by 2.89 times, are any other velocities exaggerated, like torpedoes, for example? This is again our 265 metre yardstick Yamato, and that little ship over there is the Gallant. And Gallant is firing her torpedoes down the length of the Yamato, so that we can compare the speed of the torpedoes versus the length of the ship. And so now we can do exactly the same thing we did earlier, but instead of the Yamato moving, the torpedo is moving. And the published in-game speed for a Gallant torpedo is 61 nautical miles per hour, which is 31.38 metres per second. Now I'll spare you the maths, but that means that it should take 8.44 seconds for the torpedo to travel the length of the 265 metre Yamato. So the Gallant fires, the torpedo starts at the back and heads towards the front, and we see that it takes about 3 seconds. So some of you may have already spotted a theme here, and that's if we take the time it should have taken and we divide that by the time it actually took, we get an exaggeration factor of, drumroll please, 2.88 times. And that's a factor which is so close to 2.89 that I think we can assume that the exaggeration of torpedo speed and ship speed is identical. So, like we did with ship speed, let's take the published torpedo speed of 61 knots and work out what the actual modelled velocity is. So we take our exaggeration factor, I'm going to use 2.88 this time, and we multiply that by the published speed of 31.38 metres per second, or 61 knots. And that works out to a rather brisk 90.37 metres per second. If we convert that into knots, the modelled speed of a Gallant torpedo is 175.68 nautical miles per hour. So a Gallant torpedo is not travelling at 61 knots, no, it's travelling at 175.68 knots. If you convert that into miles per hour, that's 202.17 or 325.36 kilometres per hour, which at real-time speed in the game, again, looks like this, which is pretty familiar. That's what it looks like in the game. And then if we slow that down to what 61 knots would look like in the real world against the real world Yamato, you can see it's considerably slower. And then I'm going to put top and bottom, so you can see on the bottom is adjusted to real world speed 61 knots, the top is the game speed 61 knots, and then there's something even worse, which is that actually British torpedoes travelled only about 25 knots. And so this is what a real British World War II era torpedo would look like versus the length of the Yamato with the game speed on the top. So you can see in the real world it would be considerably slower than what you see in the game. As I said before, that speed exaggeration is by design. It's designed to make the game engaging and exciting. When I was planning this video, I thought that shell velocity and torpedo velocity would be the only things that would be exaggerated. But I was reviewing the footage that I took with my clanmate Avaricious in preparation for the video, and actually I discovered that there was something odd on the aiming reticule when I was firing shells, and it was that the distance of 4 kilometers or 4.5 kilometers that I was firing over, it was telling me that my shells were going to get there much sooner than they should do if they were traveling at the published velocity. So let's have a look at that as well. Now, shell velocity is much harder to deal with because the modelling includes modelling of drag, which is where air resistance slows down the shell as it travels, which is why shells tend to start off in quite a flat trajectory and then drop off more towards the end, and it depends on the calibre and the weight of the shell and so on. But nevertheless, immediately here we can spot a problem, and that is that the Yamato's heads-up display is telling me that it's going to take 4.04 seconds for my shells to travel 7.53 kilometers to the Gallant. And if we divide 7,530 meters by 4.04 seconds, we get an average velocity over that distance of 1,863 meters per second. But stats bloke, I hear you cry. The initial muzzle velocity of HE from Yamato is 780 meters per second. So unless these shells are accelerating in the air, they are traveling faster than the game says they are, which sounds very familiar, doesn't it? How much faster? Well, that's kind of difficult to calculate because of the modelling of the physics and the fact that we've got a measured value and a published value, which is the initial muzzle velocity, whereas our measured value is the actual average velocity across that distance. But because the shells should be slowing down as they go towards the target, we should expect the average speed over that distance to be slightly lower than the muzzle velocity. So because of that, we'd expect the exaggeration factor that we calculate to be slightly lower than what it actually is. So one last piece of maths then, if we take the measured velocity of 1,863 meters per second and we divide that by the published muzzle velocity of 780 meters per second, we get an exaggeration factor of roughly 2.38 times. That 1800 meters per second is slightly lower than the muzzle velocity, so that would actually increase the multiplication factor if we had the actual muzzle velocity. So it seems quite likely to me that all velocities in the game are multiplied by a factor of about 2.9 compared to their published speeds. What does this mean for you as a player? Absolutely nothing, apart from the fact that you're playing a game rather than a simulation. A simulation would use one-time scaling. A game, to make it more exciting and engaging, speeds that up to make things happen quicker. But just think about the distances involved for a second. I love doing this. So if you think about 4 kilometers, which is a distance we've been talking about quite a lot, in the game, that's point blank range. If you're 4 kilometers away from another ship, that's next to you. But if you were able to step off that ship and walk 4 kilometers to the other ship, it would take you around about an hour to do that at a good pace. That is a long way. If you think about torpedo speeds, and I said that British torpedoes around 20-25 knots, it's going to take them several minutes to travel from your ship to 4 kilometers away to the other ship. That's a long time. And so actually, if you come back to the gallant commander question, yeah, he probably would be able to finish his coffee or tea in time for the torpedo to reach its target. It's not the seconds that it takes in the game, and in real life it would take much, much longer. But again, this is a game, not a simulation, and so it's by design that things are much faster in the game, as it turns out just less than 3 times faster, than a simulation would be. And that's just for the fun of it. I hope you found this investigation into the velocities in the game interesting. It's not going to make you a better player to know this stuff. It's just background information. I find it interesting as a programmer myself. I find it interesting to dig into how the game is made and the reasons that the developers have made certain decisions. And I totally understand why they've decided to speed it up, and I'm glad that they did, because it makes the game fun and engaging and fast and exhilarating to play. So take care of each other, Statsfolk, and I will speak to you soon. Why can I not get dispersion like that when I play the actual game?